Welcome back, Science 10. This is the last section in the CD4 booklet. It's agriculture and nutrient cycle. So it kind of is a final part of all the things we've been talking about so far in CD4. So of course we have seeds, plants, animals, etc., or plants taking in nutrients in order to grow. Crops, however, as they're harvested, they take nitrogen and phosphorus from the ground, from fields, etc. And this diversion of nitrates and phosphates from local cycles would soon deplete the soil, unless, of course, farmers have some way of restoring those nutrients back in the soil. So fertilizers are ways of doing that, ways of putting materials back into the ground, restoring the nutrients and increasing production from land. Some estimates suggest that fertilizers containing nitrogen and phosphates could as much as double yields of cereal crops such as wheat and barley. However, fertilizers must be used responsible, and more is not necessarily better. So just putting a ton of fertilizer in your ground doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a good thing. Soil bacteria convert nitrogen content of fertilizer into nitrates, as we saw in the nitrogen cycle assignment. But the presence of high levels of nitrates, if they're not used up by crops, they'll remain in the ground. And if we have an accumulation of nitrates, it could turn into nitric acid. So that NO3 molecule combining with hydrogen making HNO3, which is nitric acid. And what that would do is change the acidity level of the ground, and that would affect organisms living in the soil, such as decomposers. So depending upon the soil and other chemicals, they give a recommendation here for how much fertilizer could be in the ground, and it could make the soil 10 times more acidic after 10 years if we have this amount of fertilizer being applied. And of course that can have devastation on food production. It says here most grasslands are relatively neutral, and with that there's a pH scale which measures how acidic or how basic something is. A pH value of 7 is what would pure water be, and most land is around 7. But if it gets lower, it becomes more acidic. So for example, if it drops to 6, some sensitive crops like alfalfa and barley don't grow very well. So the effect on agricultural land near the Great Lakes is even greater, as the local soils are more vulnerable to acids. A drop to 5 would affect almost every crop. Okay. So the idea of fertilizer, replacing those nutrients back in the ground, but more isn't necessarily better. Fertilizer and ecosystem. So the accumulation of nitrogen and phosphate fertilizer produces an environmental problem, of course. So after the snow melts in the winter and spring happens, all that water running off into nearby streams, lakes, spring runoff carries decaying plant matter that was left in the field, and also that fertilizer-rich soil. The fertilizer could be carried to streams and then lakes. Putting those nutrients in lakes would allow algae to increase in population, because fertilizer would be their food. So that would grow rapidly, and that is called an algal bloom. So Wascana Creek often has that issue, a lot of algae forming, and of course that algae dies, and we get that really nasty smell of decomposition of algae. When the algae die, bacteria uses oxygen from the water to decompose them. So that decomposition is that smell that you have. And the bacteria that decomposes the dead plant, the bacteria needs oxygen, so they pull out the oxygen from the water. So oxygen is present in water, that's how fish breathe. But if we have bacteria constantly pulling the oxygen out, the number of fish would drop because there's no oxygen to breathe. So dying animals only make the problem worse, as decomposers begin to recycle that matter and allow more bacteria, and then of course take even more oxygen out. So oxygen depletion from a stream or river or lake is a problem. Nitrates also have another problem. They convert nitrates into nitrites, so those are the ones that live in an oxygen-free environment. Nitrites are dangerous to animals that have blood, such as humans, mammals, etc. Nitrates can attach to the hemoglobin in blood, reducing its ability to carry oxygen to body tissues. So that's a danger if you consume that. So it's difficult if young animals, including young humans, ingest that because their stomach just isn't acidic enough. Usually with adults, teenagers, etc., we have acid in our stomach which kills those bacteria that convert nitrates into nitrites. But younger animals, babies, their stomachs aren't as acidic, so there's a problem there. Those bacteria cannot be killed. So that's an issue as well. So the question of how much nitrate should be allowed in drinking water and food is important, but we also need to know more about the nitrogen cycle in order to properly evaluate the environmental impact of nitrates. So questions, only 4 of them, relatively easy. Number 1, why do levels of nitrogen, phosphorus in fields decline when crops are harvested? Okay, we talked about that earlier on. 2, explain how excess fertilizers might affect decomposing organisms. 3, why do algal blooms usually occur in the spring? B, explain how algal blooms affect other organisms in freshwater ecosystems. So we just talked about that. And then 4, what dangers do high levels of nitrates in the drinking water present for infants? That danger is not there for adults, but infants is an issue. So over here you'll find the answer for that. Okay, so that is the last assignment for CD4, agriculture, and the nutrient cycles. See you again.